And in that spirit, I'm really honoured to introduce Phil now, who's going to talk to us much more powerfully than I can about his own story. Over to you.
Okay.
Pass the mic.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to extend a real thanks to Shelter for inviting me along to this event. It's a super service, really enjoyable. And I have to say, as a Derbyshire lad, it's a real treat to come to the city now and again as well. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes sharing with you my story and how homelessness can really touch a wide cross-section of society, but also the dramatic and positive effect that Shelter has on my life. So I was married for quite a long time. I had a solid 30-year career in aerospace technology, and I was responsible for overseas business development. But I hit a bit of a crossroads around 8 years ago. My parents were both terminally ill. My dad had Alzheimer's, my mum had cancer. I didn't have any siblings to help me out with care. And I also had a son that required 4 heart operations. So as you can imagine, there was quite a lot of plate spinning going on at that time. Especially as my wife, unfortunately, for medical reasons, couldn't drive. And there was increasing pressure on me to travel abroad. My company would be saying, shouldn't Bill be in Tokyo this week? And in actual fact, I was either at Birmingham Children's Hospital or hopping around between care homes. So unfortunately, that really didn't hold up, and a 30-year career came to a sudden end. That really boiled over when my wife turned around to me and said, Phil, I think I want a divorce. Happy days. At that point, I was honestly really rather burned out with the commercial career rat race. And I'd always been interested in photography and filming, hence get up over there. And I found a bit of a niche in developing and editing life stories for people at events. So I would take their old photos, digitally scan them, and produce tasteful life stories. And that sort of worked okay, but it was kind of bumping along. It never really took off. And I was becoming increasingly reliant on dipping into my pension. There was a string of further events which I won't list this evening, otherwise it would be a very long evening. But my mental health had really taken a battering by this point, with stress-related issues, PTSD, that kind of thing. And through no fault of my own, I had to leave the property that I was renting. I decided to move into a small hotel in Harwich, thinking that would be a short-term stopgap. But funds really continued to ebb away. I was desperately trying to prop up my business, working on new websites, marketing, wasting more money on Google AdWords, desperately trying to drum up business. But throughout all of this, of course, COVID then kicked in, which kind of the final nail in the coffin. So around this time last Christmas, as a last desperate money-saving money-saving ploy, I decided I had no alternative but to move into my car. So Starbucks became a regular haunt. I would make a very expensive cup of coffee last around 7 hours. I would wash in there disabled glue, so I was able to keep a decent level of hygiene. But I was seriously low at that point. In fact, I was really quite suicidal. And I saw my funds ebbing away really as a countdown to jumping off the Orwell Bridge. Obviously not a good idea. And it was the thought of my son, who successfully got through the heart operations, the thought of him really that pulled me back from that precipice. To make matters worse, the storage company where I put all my stuff, including my bedding and winter clothes, they decided to lock me out because I owed them some money. So I was wrapping clothes around me at night, trying to keep warm, and periodically switching the heater on in my car. and I was watching the fuel gauge get lower and lower and lower, and finally the heater backed up. I've always enjoyed cooking, and I pride myself on liking reasonably wholesome food, but I was living on cold microwave meals from Morrison's. As a special treat, I would enjoy a Big Mac every now and again. I can tell you, I've not been back to McDonald's for a year. So at that point, I was really at crisis point, and this was approaching last Christmas. I recall going into the loo at Sainsbury's. I would, be bombarded with Christmas music, the sight of families loading up huge shopping sessions into their car, and I would often come out there, in tears. It was a pretty awful time. I called the St.Martins, and they were great. They were very, very, they were a good ear, but there was no real tangible help that I could grasp hold of. And it was at that point that I turned to shelter, and things completely changed for me at that point. Jenny was unhurried. I was upset for some of the call, and she listened to my story without pressuring me, without having to be quick. And towards the end of it, she helped me put together an action plan, help with day-to-day requirements, where to get hot food, where to get my washing done, important people to contact from the benefits and entitlements. I was completely, it was alien to me. The thought of going on the dole was something I just didn't do. And in retrospect, I paid my taxes for many, many years, decades. I was entitled to it, and I shouldn't feel guilty about doing that. And Jenny empowered me and put me in the right direction to get things moving. So making those calls, I felt really started to gain momentum. They, contacting the council, they would then contact me back, and there was traction, there was momentum. The system was really working. I went into then a temporary shelter, and boy, that was no frills. But it was a roof over the head, and it was, it was warm. Not the kind of people I would normally bond with, but I got on great with them. As I mentioned, I enjoyed cooking. And there was a family that were between houses, and the little girl Emma, she would help me cook. I would do curry for 12 on a Saturday night. And little Emma would help me chop up all the spices and herbs. Her parents loved seeing all of that. So I bonded with quite a few people, and they're still great friends today. So today, I'm now in a comfortable apartment. It's safe and it's warm. And more importantly, I've got a clear headspace, not just focusing on the day-to-day necessities of life, but I can be creative again. I'm studying microelectronics, software coding. I've got a 3D printer, so I can sketch an idea in the morning over coffee, and come the evening, I've got some crazy invention coming off my 3D printer. Great. It's my intention to start a new business as I get, I've got to have 2 new knees first, so it's better if I get all that lot done first, and then hopefully start up a new business again. But this Christmas is going to be great. It's going to be festive. I've got my son lined up to come and visit me for 4 days. He's going to be staying with me. We've got lots of boys' stuff planned, great food and a lot of fun. So I'm now in a really good place. But without any exaggeration, the intervention from shelter saved my life. And I really feel like I have a reboot thanks to their help. So it's Phil Cunliffe version 2.0 onwards and upwards. Thank you.